Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's slide tutorials. In the last class, we've talked about the anatomy of the hand and some clinical correlates. In further discussion with many of the people who had listening to that, I found it interesting that many people don't like to study the hand anatomy. And the general consensus is definitely because of the numbers of ligaments in the hand. So for this purpose, I've decided to do this video on the ligaments of the hand. Due to the numbers of ligaments in the hand, I think the best thing to do is to split these slide tutorials into 3 different bits where we talk about specific parts of the ligaments in the hand. So for this current one, I'll be talking on the ligaments around the wrist and the joints that makes the wrist. Then the subsequent ones will be talking about the ligaments around the carpal bones, which are the intrinsic ligaments, and then the ligaments of the fingers. Before we dive in, I just want to have a little recap on the anatomy of the hand. So right in front of us is the bony anatomy of the hand, and from the picture you could see the radius and the ulnar bone, which makes up the radioulnar joint, and also we see the 8 carpal bones arranged in 2 rows, which we term the proximal rows and the distal rows. And on top of that, we have the metacarpals, which are numbered from 1 to 5, from the thumb to the little finger. Then we have the phalanges, which, except in the thumb, which has 2 phalanges, the other fingers do have 3 phalanges. So in a nutshell, these are the 27 bones that make up the hand. Now, because we're talking about the ligament, and the most important function of a ligament is it connects 2 bones together, we'll be focusing on the joints of the wrist. So if we look clearly at the wrist, we could see there are 2 main joints. The first one is the radioulnar joint, which is directly a joint between the radius and the ulna. And the second joint is the radiocarpal joint, which is between the radius and the rows of the carpal bone. So our focus tonight will be solely on these 2 joints, the distal radioulnar joint and the radiocarpal joint. At the radioulnar joint, as it sounds, the radioulnar joint, which is the joint between the radius and the ulna, and it is one of those joints that supports the movement of pronation and supination of the forearm. For this movement to be successful, we have 2 ligaments that work hand in hand to support the distal radioulnar joint. One of these ligaments is called the palmar radioulnar ligament. Now, from the name, we can all infer that it is the radioulnar ligament found at the palmar surface of the hand. And almost in opposite direction is the dorsal radioulnar ligament, which is the radioulnar ligament found at the dorsum of the hand. So in a nutshell, the distal radioulnar joint is supported by 2 ligaments, the palmar radioulnar ligament and the dorsal radioulnar ligament. And these 2 ligaments support the joint to be able to perform the pronation and supination movements. Directly in front of the distal radioulnar joint is the radiocarpal joint, where we normally would refer to as the wrist joint. Now in this joint, this is where the radius meets the proximal carpal bone, which includes the scaphoid, the lunate, and the triquetrum. If we observe clearly, we can see that the distal end of the ulnar does not articulate with the carpal bones down here, and at the same time, it's safe to say the radiocarpal joint is only a joint between the radius and those three carpal bones we talked about. In order to maintain the stability of this radiocarpal joint, we have 5 main ligaments that supports the movement and action of this joint. Firstly, we have the palmar radiocarpal ligament found at the palmar surface. Then we have the dorsal radiocarpal ligament. In addition to this, we have the palmar ulnocarpal ligaments, then the radial and ulnar collateral ligaments. So these 5 ligaments maintains the stability of the radiocarpal joint. Before we go into details, I just want to give a little bit insights to how I easily remember the names of the ligaments. Now, the first one we'll be talking about in the radiocarpal ligaments are the palmar radiocarpal ligaments. And from the naming, you could see it's a ligament that is situated at the palmar surface of the wrist, and it's a ligament that links the radial bone or the radius to the carpal bone. So from the name alone, it's easier to understand where the ligament is coming from and where it is being inserted on. Now, the palmar radiocarpal ligament is a thick band of ligaments that connects from the radius to the scaphoid, one of the bones at the proximal rows, and from there it sometimes radiates into the lunate and to the capitate. And one of the key ligaments in the palmar radiocarpal component is the long and the short palmar ligaments, which is a little bit isolated. Moving on from the palmar radiocarpal ligament, if you flip the hand to the other side, then you see the dorsal radiocarpal ligament. So the same way we named the palmar radiocarpal ligament, this also tells us it's a radiocarpal ligament. It's a ligament found at the dorsal part of the hand that links the radius to the carpal bone. Now, this is quite small and weaker than the palmar ligament, and because it's at the dorsal part, which is at the back of the hand, one of its main function is to reduce how much the hand bends towards the palm, which we will refer to as flexion. The third wrist ligament is the palmar ulnocarpal ligament. From the name, we could all agree with me that it originates from the ulnar bone and it attaches into the carpal bone, and it's found at the palmar surface of the hand. So if you look at the diagram below, you could see how it originates from the ulnar part and goes on into the carpal bones, and that's where the name comes from, the palmar ulnocarpal ligament. Now, the palmar ulnocarpal ligament has different parts, and from the individual names we can all see from where it originates and from where it's been inserted. For example, the first one originates from the ulnar bone and inserts into the capitate. Then the next one originates from the ulnar and inserts into the lunate, and then to the triquetral, and then to the pisiform. So always remember, the easy way to know the hand ligament is to look at the name and be able to connect the bones that the ligament is being attached to. And lastly, we have the 2 collateral ligaments, which sits on either side of the wrist. At the radial side is the radial collateral ligament, and at the ulnar side is the ulnar collateral ligament. And what this ligament does is to prevent side-to-side movement of the wrist. the radial deviation, and the ulnar deviation. And with this, we've been able to cover the ligaments at the two main joints in the wrist, which is the radioulnar joint and the radiocarpal joints. And that's all for tonight's class. In the next class, we'll be talking about the ligaments around the carpal and the metacarpal. Thank you for sticking around, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.